The clock struck midnight as Catherine sat alone in the private study of Kensington Palace. The room felt cold, despite the warm fire crackling in the fireplace. She had been avoiding this moment for weeks, but tonight she could no longer run from the truth that was eating her alive from the inside. Earlier that evening, she had attended another royal dinner with William. They smiled for the cameras, held hands for the photographers, and played the perfect couple everyone expected them to be. But behind those smiles, Catherine felt like she was drowning in a sea of lies and secrets. It all started 3 weeks ago. When she was looking through old family documents in the palace library, she was searching for historical records about previous royal children for a speech she was preparing. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, had been so helpful, bringing box after box of carefully preserved papers and letters. Catherine remembered how excited she felt that day, thinking she might find some beautiful stories about royal families from the past. She loved learning about the history of the family she had married into. But what she found instead changed everything she thought. She knew about her own life, hidden between pages of an old leather book. She discovered a folder marked with William's father's seal. Inside were letters and documents that made her hands shake as she read them. The papers revealed agreements and decisions that had been made about her children's future. Decisions that William knew about, but had never told her. The documents showed that certain arrangements had been made for Prince George and Princess Charlotte before they were even born. Their education, their future roles, even the people they would be allowed to marry, had already been decided by others. Catherine had always believed that she and William would make these choices together as parents. But the most shocking discovery was a letter written by William himself, agreeing to these arrangements. In his own handwriting, he had promised to keep these decisions secret from Catherine. He had written that he understood his wife might not agree with the traditional ways, so it was better if she never knew, until the children were older. Catherine felt her world crashing down around her. As she read those words, the man she loved, the man she had given her heart to completely, had been lying to her about their children's future. Every conversation they had ever had about raising their kids, naturally, and giving them choices, had been meaningless to him. She remembered their wedding day, how they had promised to be honest with each other always. She thought about all the nights they stayed up talking about their dreams for their children, how they would be different from previous royal generations. William had looked into her eyes and agreed with everything she said, knowing all along that he had already signed agreements that made their dreams impossible. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. It was not just about the secret itself, but about the fact that William had looked at her every day for years, knowing he was keeping this enormous truth from her. Every time she talked about their children's future, he had nodded and smiled, letting her believe they were partners in these important decisions. Catherine had tried to convince herself that maybe there was some explanation, some reason that would make this all make sense. She spent sleepless nights hoping that when she finally confronted William, he would have answers that would heal the pain in her heart. But when she finally gathered the courage to ask him about it, his response broke her heart completely. William did not deny the documents or try to explain them away. Instead, he became defensive and angry that she had been looking through private family papers. He told her that she did not understand the pressures of being a future king, that some decisions had to be made for the good of the monarchy even if they were difficult. He said that as his wife, she should trust his judgment and support him, not question every decision he made for their family. Catherine could not believe the man standing in front of her was the same person she had fallen in love with at university. This was not the William who used to stay up all night talking with her about changing the world, about being better than the generations that came before them. The fight that followed was the worst they had ever had. William accused her of being naive about royal life, of expecting fairy tale endings in a world that required difficult choices. Catherine accused him of treating her like a child who could not be trusted with the truth about her own children's lives. For days after that fight, they barely spoke to each other. They continued their public duties, appearing together at events, in ceremonies, but at home, they lived like strangers. Catherine would find herself staring at William across the dinner table, wondering if she had ever really known him at all. The children sensed the tension between their parents. Even though Catherine and William tried their best to hide it, Prince George asked his mother why she looked so sad all the time, and Princess Charlotte started having nightmares and asking for extra bedtime stories. Catherine's heart broke watching her children worry about problems they were too young to understand. She realized that the decisions made in those secret documents were not just affecting her and William, but were already casting shadows over their innocent young lives. She began to question everything about their marriage, their life together, and her place in the royal family. Had William ever really loved her? Or had she just been chosen because she would be a suitable wife who would not cause problems? Had all their beautiful moments together been real, or had she been living in a dream while he kept the harsh reality hidden from her? The loneliness Catherine felt was overwhelming. She could not talk to her friends about this because royal secrets had to stay within the family. She could not confide in her own parents because they would worry too much and might not understand the complicated world she lived in. Even her lady-in-waiting Sarah, who had become like a sister to her over the years, could not be trusted with this information. Catherine realized that being a princess meant being surrounded by people, but still feeling completely alone when facing the biggest problems of her life. As she sat in that study at midnight, Catherine knew that something had to change. She could not continue living this lie, pretending everything was fine, while her heart was breaking every single day. The love she had for William was still there, buried under all the hurt and anger, but she did not know if love alone could fix what had been broken between them. She pulled out a piece of paper and picked up her pen. If William could keep secrets and make decisions without including her, then she could make decisions of her own. Tonight, she would write the words that might save their marriage or end it forever. Catherine stared at the blank piece of paper in front of her, her pen trembling in her hand. Where could she even begin to express the pain that had been growing in her heart for weeks? She closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to the beginning, to the days when everything between her and William had been pure and simple. She remembered the first time she saw him at St. Andrew's University. He was just another student then, trying to blend in with everyone else. But there was something special about him that caught her attention. It was not because he was a prince. She had actually tried to avoid thinking about that part of who he was. It was the way he laughed at his friends' jokes, the way he helped an older professor carry heavy books, the small kindnesses that showed his true character. Their first real conversation happened in the library during exam week. Catherine was stressed about her art history test, surrounded by books and notes, when William sat down at the table across from her. He was studying the same subject, and when he saw her struggling with a particularly difficult concept, he offered to help. They spent the entire night in that library, talking about art and history, but also about their dreams and fears. William told her how scared he was about his future responsibilities, how he sometimes wished he could just be a normal person. Catherine shared her own worries about fitting in at such a prestigious university, as coming from a middle-class family. That night, Catherine fell in love, not with a prince, but with a young man who was kind, funny, and surprisingly vulnerable. William seemed to feel the same way about her. He told her later that she was the first person who had ever made him feel like he could be himself, without pretenses or royal protocols. Their courtship was like a beautiful fairy tale. But it was also real and grounded in genuine friendship. They would take long walks around the campus, talking for hours about everything and nothing. William would bring her coffee during her late study sessions, and Catherine would leave little encouraging notes in his textbooks before big exams. When William finally told her that he loved her, they were sitting by the lake near their university. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He took her hands in his and said that she had become the most important person in his life, that he could not imagine a future without her in it. Catherine remembered how her heart had felt like it might burst with happiness in that moment. She had never felt so loved, so cherished, so completely understood by another person. William was not just her boyfriend, he was her best friend, her partner, her safe place in a world that sometimes felt overwhelming. Even when their relationship became public and the media attention became intense, they supported each other through it all. William would hold her when she cried after reading particularly cruel comments about her family or her appearance. Catherine would remind him of who he really was when the pressure of being a future king made him doubt himself. Their engagement was everything Catherine had dreamed of, even though it came with enormous public scrutiny. When William proposed with his mother's ring, he told her that he wanted her to carry a piece of Diana's love into their marriage. He said that his mother would have adored Catherine, that she would have been so happy to see her son with someone who loved him for himself. The wedding day itself was magical. But it was the quiet moments that Catherine treasured most. The way William's hands shook slightly when he put the ring on her finger, showing that, despite all the royal training, he was just as nervous and excited as she was. The private moment they shared in the carriage after the ceremony, when he whispered that he was the luckiest man in the world. Their early married life had been blissful. They lived in a small apartment in Wales while William worked as a helicopter pilot. And Catherine loved the simple domesticity of it all. She would cook dinner for him when he came home from difficult rescue missions. He would tell her stories about the people he had helped save that day. It was during those quiet evenings that they would talk about their future children, about the kind of parents they wanted to be. William would say that he wanted their children to have as normal a childhood as possible, to be able to make their own choices about their lives. Catherine would share her dreams of taking their kids on adventures, teaching them about the world, beyond palace walls. When Catherine became pregnant with George, William was the most attentive husband she could have asked for. He would talk to her belly every night, telling their unborn son about all the places they would explore together, all the things he would teach him. He promised that their child would know he was loved, not because he was a prince, but because he was their son. The birth of Prince George was the happiest day of Catherine's life up to that point. Watching William hold their tiny son for the first time, seeing the tears of joy in his eyes, she felt like their little family was complete and perfect. William whispered to the baby that he would always protect him, always be honest with him, always put his happiness first. Princess Charlotte's birth brought even more joy to their family. William was an amazing father, patient and loving and completely devoted to both children. Catherine would watch him playing on the floor with George while she nursed Charlotte, and she felt so grateful for the life they had built together. But looking back now, Catherine realized that there had been signs that she had missed or chosen to ignore. There were phone calls that William would take in private, conversations that would stop when she entered the room. There were meetings with his father that he would not talk about afterward, claiming they were just boring royal business. Catherine had trusted William completely, so she never questioned these things. She believed that if something was important enough to affect their family, he would share it with her. She thought they had built their marriage on a foundation of complete honesty and openness. Now she understood that while she had been living in their beautiful bubble of love and family life, William had been carrying the weight of these secret agreements. She wondered how many nights he had lain awake next to her, knowing that he was keeping such enormous secrets about their children's futures. The most painful part was realizing that every conversation they had ever had about their children's education, their future choices, their dreams and possibilities, had been meaningless from William's perspective. He had let her plan and hope and dream, knowing that decisions had already been made that would make many of those dreams impossible. Catherine felt like she had been married to a stranger, someone who could look into her eyes and lie by omission. Every single day, the William she thought she knew would never have been capable of such deception. No, but the evidence was right there in his own handwriting. Agreements he had signed willingly. As she sat there remembering all those beautiful moments, Catherine felt them becoming tainted by the knowledge of what William had been hiding. She did not know if she could ever look at him the same way again. She could ever trust him completely after this betrayal. But despite all the pain and anger, the love was still there. That was the most confusing part of all. The man who had held her during thunderstorms, who had celebrated every small victory in her life, who had given her the most precious gifts of George and Charlotte, she just did not know if love was enough to overcome lies this big. Catherine had been carrying the weight of her discovery for 2 weeks, watching William interact with their children, wondering how he could seem so natural and loving while keeping such massive secrets. Every bedtime story he read to George, every tea party he attended with Charlotte, felt like another layer of deception. She had planned to confront him calmly, to sit down together like the adults they were, and have an honest conversation about what she had found. But when the moment finally came, all her careful planning fell apart. It was a Sunday morning, and they were having breakfast in their private dining room. George was excitedly telling William about a dream he had about becoming an astronaut, his little face glowing with possibility. Charlotte was trying to feed jam to her stuffed rabbit, making both parents laugh despite the tension Catherine felt. William looked so relaxed and happy, playing the role of the devoted father perfectly. He listened to George's space adventure story with genuine interest, asking questions and encouraging his son's imagination. To anyone watching, he would have seemed like the ideal parent, supportive and loving. But Catherine knew better now. She knew that William had already signed documents that would determine George's path in life, that her son's dreams of space exploration would eventually be crushed by the reality of royal duty. Watching this performance of parental encouragement, while knowing the truth, made her feel sick. When the children finished eating and ran off to play, Catherine could not hold back any longer. Her hands were shaken as she reached into her bag and pulled out the folder of documents she had photocopied. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. William looked up from his newspaper, immediately sensing the seriousness. In her tone, "What's wrong, Catherine? You look upset." "I found these," she said, placing the folder on the table between them. "In the palace library, hidden in your father's papers." William's face went completely white as he recognized the documents. For a moment, he just stared at them without saying anything, and Catherine could see the wheels turning in his mind as he tried to figure out how to handle this situation. "Catherine, I can explain," he finally said, but his voice lacked the confidence she was used to hearing from him. "Can you?" she asked, her voice getting stronger as her anger began to surface. "Can you explain why you've been lying to me about our children's futures for their entire lives? You explain why you let me believe we were making decisions together when you had already signed agreements behind my back?" William ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Catherine knew meant he was stressed and trying to buy time to think. "It's complicated, Catherine. There are things about being royal that you don't understand, pressures and responsibilities that I have to balance." "Don't you dare patronize me," Catherine said, her voice rising. "I've been part of this family for years now. I understand plenty about royal responsibilities. What I don't understand is how you could look me in the eye every day and lie to me." "I never lied to you," William protested. But even as he said it, he seemed to realize how weak the argument sounded. "You let me plan George's education. Let me research schools and teaching methods, knowing that decisions had already been made about where he would go and what he would study. You listened to me talk about giving our children choices about their futures, nodding and agreeing when you had already taken those choices away." William stood up and began pacing around the room, clearly agitated. "You think this was easy for me? You think I wanted to keep this from you? I was trying to protect you, to let you enjoy being a mother without worrying about all the complicated political aspects." "Protect me?" Catherine could not believe what she was hearing. "By treating me like a child who couldn't handle the truth about her own children. By making me look foolish every time I talked about our family's future." "That's not how it was," William said. But his voice lacked conviction. Catherine opened the folder and pulled out the letter, written in William's own handwriting. "Then explain this. Explain why you wrote that it was better if I never knew about these arrangements. Explain why you thought your wife, the mother of your children, didn't have the right to know what was being planned for them." William stopped, pacey, and looked at the letter. She could see the exact moment when he realized there was no way to explain away his own words. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of deception. "The monarchy is bigger than both of us, Catherine," he finally said. "There are traditions and requirements that have existed for hundreds of years. I can't just change everything because we want to do things differently." "But you let me believe that we could," Catherine said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "You let me think that our love, our partnership, meant something. You let me believe that we were building something new together." "We are building something together," William insisted, moving toward her. "These arrangements don't change how much I love you, how much our family means to me." Catherine stepped back, not ready for his touch when she felt so betrayed. "How can you say that? How can you claim to love me when you've been living a lie with me for years?" "Because I do love you," William said, his own voice breaking now, "more than you'll ever know. But I also have duties, responsibilities that existed long before we met. I have to think about what's best for the country, for the monarchy, not just what's best for our family." "And you decided that what was best was keeping me in the dark," Catherine said. "You decided that I couldn't be trusted with the full truth about my own life." William sat back down heavily, suddenly looking much older than his years. "I thought I could handle it all myself. I thought I could find ways to make the arrangements work while still giving you and the children the life you wanted." "Was never your decision to make alone," Catherine said. "We're supposed to be partners, William. We're supposed to make these difficult choices together." "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," William said. "My father, the advisors, the politicians, they all have opinions about how things should be done. I'm trying to balance everyone's expectations while still being the husband and father I want to be." "And what about my expectations?" Catherine asked. "What about my right to know what's happening in my own family? Did that ever factor into your balancing act?" William looked at her with pain in his eyes. "Of course it did. But I also knew how much you hated the political side of royal life, how much you preferred focusing on the charity work and the public engagements. I thought I was sparing you from having to deal with the ugly realities. Those ugly realities affect our children, William. They affect me. You don't get to decide what I can and can't handle based on your assumptions about what I want to know." Argument continued for hours, going in circles as William tried to justify his choices, and Catherine expressed her hurt and anger. Neither of them was really listening to the other anymore, both too caught up in their own pain to hear what their partner was trying to say. Finally, exhausted and emotionally drained, they both fell silent. The damage had been done. Words had been said that couldn't be taken back. Catherine looked at the man she had loved for so many years and realized that she didn't know if they could come back from this. "I need some time," she said quietly. "I need to think about everything, about what this means for us." William nodded, seeming to understand that pushing her for immediate forgiveness would only make things worse. "I never wanted to hurt you, Catherine. Everything I did, I thought I was doing for the right reasons." "I know you did," Catherine said, and she meant it. "But good intentions don't erase the lies, William. They don't fix the trust that's been broken." As she left the room, Catherine felt like she was walking away from everything she had believed about her marriage, her family, and her future. The confrontation had answered some of her questions, but it had also raised new ones that she wasn't sure she was ready to face. After the confrontation with William, Catherine felt like she was drowning in her own thoughts. The palace, which had once felt like a home filled with love and laughter, now felt like a prison where she had to pretend everything was fine, while her world was falling apart inside. The hardest part was maintaining the facade in front of their children. George and Charlotte were too young to understand what was happening between their parents. But children have a way of sensing when something is wrong. George started asking why Mommy looked sad all the time, and Charlotte began having trouble sleeping, asking for extra bedtime stories and wanting to stay close to Catherine throughout the day. Catherine found herself studying her children's faces, wondering what their lives would really be like as they grew up. Would George ever get to choose his own path, or would he be forced into the mold that had been prepared for him before he was even born? Would Charlotte have any say in who she married, or would political alliances determine her romantic future? These thoughts haunted Catherine day and night. She would watch George playing with his toy planes, still talking excitedly about becoming an astronaut, and her heart would break, knowing that someone else had already decided his future. She would see Charlotte dancing around the nursery, free and happy and full of dreams, and wonder how long that innocence would last. William tried to act like nothing had changed between them, but the distance was obvious to anyone who really looked. They still appeared together at royal events, still smiled for the cameras, still played their roles perfectly for the public. But at home they were living like polite strangers. During their public appearances, Catherine felt like she was acting in a play where she had forgotten her lines. She would stand next to William, wave at the crowds, and make small talk with dignitaries, all while feeling completely disconnected from her own life. The people cheering for them had no idea that their fairy tale marriage was crumbling behind closed doors, the media, always watching for any sign of trouble in the royal marriage, began to pick up on subtle changes. They noticed that Catherine and William were not holding hands as often during public walkabouts. They pointed out that Catherine's smiles seemed forced in recent photographs. Royal correspondents started writing articles about tension in the marriage, though they had no idea how accurate their speculation really was. Catherine's mother, Carol, called several times, sensing that something was wrong with her daughter. But Catherine could not bring herself to explain the situation. How could she tell her mother that the man she had raised Catherine to trust and love had been keeping enormous secrets about his own children? How could she burden her parents with problems they could not help solve? Her sister Pippa tried to visit, but Catherine found herself making excuses to avoid spending time with anyone who might ask too many questions. She was afraid that if anyone showed her too much kindness or concern, she might break down completely and say things that could not be taken back. The isolation was crushing. Catherine had always been a social person, someone who drew strength from her relationships with family and friends, but now she felt like she was living behind a wall of secrets and lies. Unable to connect authentically with anyone, even her lady-in-waiting Sarah, who had become like a sister to her over the mist. Years seemed to sense that something was wrong. Sarah would give Catherine concerned looks when she thought no one was watching. A royal protocol prevented her from asking direct questions about personal matters. Catherine began spending more and more time alone in her private study. Same room where she had discovered the documents that changed everything. She would sit there for hours, trying to make sense of how her life had become so complicated. She felt like she was living two completely different lives. The public one where she was the perfect princess, and the private one where she was a woman whose heart was breaking. Sleep became elusive. Catherine would lie awake at night listening to William's breathing beside her, wondering if he was really asleep or if he was lying there thinking about their problems too. Sometimes she would catch him looking at her with such sadness in his eyes, and she would wonder if he was finally beginning to understand how much damage his secrets had caused. The children's bedtime routine, which had always been Catherine's favorite part of the day, became almost unbearable. When George would ask her to tell him stories about when he grew up and became king, Catherine would struggle to find words that were not lies. When Charlotte would talk about marrying a prince like in her fairy tale books, Catherine would force a smile while dying inside. One evening, as Catherine was tucking Charlotte into bed, her daughter looked up at her with those innocent blue eyes and asked, "Mommy, why don't you and Daddy laugh together anymore?" The question hit Catherine like a physical blow. She had thought they were doing a good job of hiding their problems from the children, but clearly they were not as good actors as they believed. "Mommy and Daddy are just a little tired lately, sweetheart," Catherine managed to say, smoothing Charlotte's hair. "But we love you and George more than anything in the whole world. Will you always stay together?" Charlotte asked, and Catherine felt her heart shatter a little more. "We will always be your parents," Catherine said, which was the only honest answer she could give. After Charlotte fell asleep, Catherine went to check on George, who was already sleeping peacefully in his bed, surrounded by his beloved stuffed animals and books about space exploration. She sat in the chair beside his bed watching him sleep and felt overwhelmed by love and protectiveness. These were her babies, the most precious things in her life, and decisions about their futures had been made without her input or knowledge. The thought made her feel angry all over again, but it also made her feel determined. She might not be able to change what William had already agreed to, but she could make sure that she was part of every decision moving forward. But first, she had to figure out if there was still a marriage worth fighting for. The love she felt for William had not disappeared, but it was buried under layers of hurt and betrayal. She did not know if they could rebuild the trust that had been broken, or if they would be able to create the kind of partnership she had always believed they had. The thought of their marriage ending was terrifying, not just because of the public scandal it would cause, but because of what it would mean for George and Charlotte. They deserved to grow up in a home filled with love and honesty, not in the middle of a cold war between their parents. Catherine realized that she had reached a crossroads. She could continue pretending that everything was fine, living in this state of emotional limbo indefinitely, or she could take action, make some difficult decisions about what kind of life she wanted for herself and her children as she sat there in the darkness. Watching her son sleep, Catherine knew that something had to change. She could not continue living this lie, could not keep pretending that her heart was not broken. For the sake of her children, for the sake of her own sanity, she had to find a way forward. The question was whether that way forward included William, or whether she would have to find the strength to build a new life, without the man she had once believed would be her partner forever. The thought of either option filled her with fear, but she knew that staying in this painful limbo was not fair to anyone, especially not to George and Charlotte. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start making some real decisions about her future. Tonight, she would allow herself one more night of grief for the marriage she thought she had, and the future she had believed was possible. Catherine woke up the next morning with a strange sense of clarity that she had not felt in weeks. The emotional storm that had been raging inside her had finally calmed enough for her to think clearly about what she needed to do. She looked over at William, still sleeping peacefully beside her, and felt a mixture of love and sadness that took her breath away. She knew that today would be the day she made, the decision that would determine the course of their marriage and their family's future. She could not continue living in this state of uncertainty and pain, pretending that everything was fine when her heart was breaking a little more each day. After getting dressed quietly, so as not to wake William, Catherine went to check on the children. George was already awake, playing with his toy rockets in his pajamas, making whooshing sounds as he flew them through the air. Charlotte was still sleeping, her thumb in her mouth, and her favorite stuffed bunny clutched tightly too. Her chest, looking at them, so innocent and trusting, Catherine felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. Whatever decision she made today, it had to be what was best for them. They deserved parents who were honest with each other, who could work together as a team to give them the best possible childhood. During breakfast, William seemed to sense that something was different about Catherine's mood. She was not angry anymore, which probably seemed like a good sign to him, but there was something in her calmness that made him watchful and careful with his words. "Catherine," he said quietly, as the children finished eating and ran off to play, "I've been thinking about everything we discussed. Maybe we could talk to my father together, see if there's room for some changes to the arrangements." Catherine looked at him, seeing the hope in his eyes, and felt her heart break a little more. "William, it's not just about the arrangements anymore. It's about the fact that you made such important decisions without including me. It's about the lies and the secrets and the fact that I don't know if I can ever trust you completely again." William's face fell. "So what are you saying? That our marriage is over? That you're giving up on us?" "I'm not giving up," Catherine said, choosing her words carefully. "But I am taking a step back. I need some time and space to figure out who I am outside of this marriage, outside of this role that I've been playing." "What does that mean exactly?" William asked, though Catherine could see in his eyes that he already suspected what she was going to say. "It means I'm going to go stay with Pippa for a while, just for a few weeks, maybe a month. I need to be somewhere where I can think clearly, where I'm not surrounded by all the reminders of how complicated our life has become." William was quiet for a long moment, processing what she had said. "What about the children? What about our public duties?" "The children will stay here with you during the week, and I'll see them on weekends. We'll have to figure out how to handle that. Maybe we can say I'm taking some time to focus on my charity work, or that I'm dealing with a family matter." "Catherine, please," William said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Don't do this. We can work through this together. I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild your trust." Catherine looked down at their joined hands, remembering all the times William's touch had comforted her, had made her feel safe and loved. "I need to see if we can work through this, William. But I can't do that while I'm living in the middle of it all. I need some distance to get perspective." "How long?" William asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Catherine answered honestly. "Maybe a few weeks, maybe longer. I need to figure out if the person I've become in this marriage is who I really am, or if I've been trying so hard to be the perfect royal wife that I've lost myself somewhere along the way." William let go of her hand and leaned back in his chair, looking defeated. "I never wanted you to lose yourself. I fell in love with you because of who you are, not because I wanted you to become someone different. But you did want me to become someone different," Catherine said gently. You wanted me to become someone who would accept being kept in the dark about important family decisions. You wanted me to become someone who would trust you blindly without asking questions. That's not fair, William protested. But his voice lacked conviction, isn't it? Catherine asked. Every time I expressed concerns about royal protocol or asked questions about how things worked, you would tell me not to worry about it, that you would handle everything? You trained me to let you make the important decisions? William was quiet, clearly thinking about what she had said. Finally, he spoke. Maybe you're right. Maybe I did want you to be someone who would make my life easier, who wouldn't challenge the difficult decisions I had to make. But that doesn't mean I love you any less. I know you love me, Catherine said, and she meant it. But love isn't enough if we can't be honest with each other. Love isn't enough if we can't be true partners in the decisions that affect our family. The conversation was interrupted by George running into the dining room, excited about something he wanted to show his parents. Catherine and William both forced smiles and gave their son the attention he deserved. But Catherine could see the strain in William's eyes. Later that morning, while William was in meetings and the children were with their nanny, Catherine began the difficult task of packing some clothes and personal items. She did not need much, just enough for a few weeks away, but each item she folded and placed in her suitcase felt like another step away from the life she had built. She picked up a framed photograph from their wedding day. One of the candid shots taken during their private moments between the ceremony and the reception. In the picture, she and William were looking at each other with such pure joy and love that it took her breath away. They had been so happy that day, so full of hope for their future together. Catherine held the photograph for a long time, remembering how it felt to be that hopeful, that trusting, that completely in love. She wondered if they would ever be able to find their way back to those feelings, or if too much damage had been done. When it came time to tell the children about her temporary departure, Catherine chose her words very carefully. She sat them down in the nursery, with William beside her for support, and explained that Mommy needed to go help Aunt Pippa with some important work for a little while. Will you come back? Charlotte asked, climbing into Catherine's lap with the directness that only young children possess. Of course I'll come back, sweetheart, Catherine said, holding her daughter close. I'll see you every weekend, and we'll talk on the phone every day. This is just something Mommy needs to do for a little while. George, being older, seemed to sense that there was more to the story than they were being told. Are you and Daddy having a fight? He asked. Catherine looked at William, who nodded slightly, giving her permission to be as honest as possible. Sometimes grown-ups need time to think about important things, she said. Daddy and I both love you very much, and that will never change, no matter what. The goodbyes were harder than Catherine had expected. Charlotte clung to her, not wanting to let go, and George kept asking when exactly she would be back. Catherine promised them both that this separation was temporary, that she was not leaving forever, but she could see the confusion and worry in their young faces. William walked her to the car that would take her to Pippa's house, carrying her a suitcase and looking like he wanted to say something, but could not find the words. Finally, as Catherine was about to get into the car, he spoke. I know I've made mistakes, he said. I know I've hurt you in ways that I'm only beginning to understand. But please don't give up on us completely. Please remember that underneath all the complications and the protocols and the mistakes, I'm still the man who fell in love with you in that university library. Catherine looked at him, seeing not the future king or the public figure, but the young man who had once told her she made him feel like he could be himself. I'm not giving up, William. I'm trying to save us. But I need to figure out who I am outside of being your wife before I can figure out if I can be your wife in the way we both deserve. As the car pulled away from the palace, Catherine watched William standing there, looking lost and alone, and felt her resolve waver for a moment. Part of her wanted to tell the driver to stop, to run back and tell William that they could work everything out together. But she knew that would just be postponing the inevitable. They both needed to do some serious thinking about what kind of marriage they wanted to have, what kind of parents they wanted to be, and whether they could build something honest and real together. The drive to Pippa's house gave Catherine time to think about what she hoped to accomplish during this separation. She wanted to rediscover the parts of herself that had gotten lost in royal protocol and public expectations. She wanted to figure out what she really wanted from her marriage and her life. Most importantly, she wanted to determine whether she and William could build a relationship based on complete honesty and true partnership, or whether their differences about trust and decision-making were too fundamental to overcome. As the car turned into Pippa's driveway, Catherine felt a mixture of sadness and relief. She was sad to be leaving her children and the man she loved, but she was also relieved to be stepping away from the pressure and the pretense, even if it was only temporary. This separation would either give them the space they needed to find their way back to each other, or it would be the first step toward a very different kind of future. Either way, Catherine knew she had made the right decision for herself and for her family. The hardest part would be waiting to see which direction their story would ultimately take. Catherine had been staying at Pippa's countryside cottage for 2 weeks, and the peace and quiet had given her the space she desperately needed to think. Away from the palace, away from the constant pressure of royal duties and public expectations, she felt like she could breathe again for the first time in months. Pippa had been wonderful, giving Catherine the support she needed without asking too many questions. She seemed to understand that her sister needed time to process whatever was happening in her marriage, and she provided a safe space for Catherine to do that healing work. The cottage was small and cozy, nothing like the grand rooms of Kensington Palace. Catherine found herself enjoying simple pleasures that she had forgotten about, like making her own cup of tea in the morning, taking long walks through the countryside without security guards, and reading books in complete silence. But even in this peaceful setting, Catherine's thoughts constantly returned to William and the children. She spoke to George and Charlotte every day on the phone, and their voices filled her with both joy and heartbreak. They were adjusting to her absence, but she could hear the sadness in their voices when they asked when she was coming home. William had called several times, always respectful of her need for space, but clearly hoping for some sign that she was ready to come back and work things out. Their conversations were polite, but strained, both of them trying to say important things without actually addressing the elephant in the room. Catherine had spent long hours walking through the fields around the cottage, thinking about her marriage, her children, and her future. She had come to some important realizations during her time away, but she still was not sure what she wanted to do with those insights. She realized that she had lost herself somewhere in the process of becoming a royal wife and mother. She had been so focused on being perfect, on never making mistakes that would embarrass the family or cause problems for William, that she had stopped expressing her own opinions and desires. But she also realized that William had been struggling, too, trying to balance his love for his family with the enormous pressures of his position. The secret agreements about their children's futures were wrong, but they came from a place of William feeling overwhelmed by competing demands and trying to protect everyone he loved. On this particular evening, Catherine was sitting by the window, in the cottage's small living room, watching the sun set over the rolling hills. The golden light reminded her of that evening by the lake at university when William had first told her he loved her, and she felt a wave of nostalgia for the simplicity they had once shared. She had been thinking about writing to William for days, but she had not been able to find the right words. Tonight, something about the peaceful beauty of the countryside and the memories of their early love made her feel ready to try. Catherine went to the small desk in the corner of the room and pulled out a piece of paper. She wanted this letter to be different from their recent conversations, more honest and vulnerable than they had been able to be in person. She wanted to tell him everything she had been thinking and feeling during these weeks apart. She began by writing about their children, how much she missed them, and how proud she was of the father William had become. Despite everything that had happened between them, she could never doubt his love and devotion to George and Charlotte. Catherine wrote about the early days of their relationship, reminding William of the young man who had been brave enough to be vulnerable with her, who had shared his fears and dreams without worrying about maintaining a perfect image. She told him that she missed that version of him, the one who trusted her enough to show her his imperfections. She was honest about how the secret agreements had made her feel, not just angry about being excluded, but sad about what they represented about their relationship. She explained that it was not just about the specific decisions that had been made, but about the pattern of him trying to protect her by keeping her in the dark about difficult realities. Catherine wrote about her own mistakes too, acknowledging that she had sometimes been content to let William handle the complicated aspects of royal life. She admitted that she had not always insisted on being included in difficult conversations, perhaps making it easier for him to believe that she preferred not to know about unpleasant realities, but she also wrote about what she needed from their marriage moving forward. She needed to be treated as a true partner, someone who could handle difficult truths and make hard decisions alongside him. She needed honesty, even when the truth was complicated or painful, needed to feel like her voice mattered in decisions about their family's future. Catherine poured her heart onto the paper, writing about her love for William that had never wavered despite all the pain and confusion. She wrote about her hopes for their marriage, her dreams of growing old together and watching their children become the people they were meant to be. She also wrote about her fears, her worry that they might not be able to rebuild the trust that had been broken. She was honest about the fact that she did not know if they could find their way back to each other, but she wanted to try if he was willing to do the hard work of changing the patterns that had led them to this crisis. The letter was long, pages of Catherine's careful handwriting, and by the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face. Writing it had been emotionally exhausting, but also cathartic. She felt like she had finally been able to express everything that had been building up inside her for weeks. Catherine sealed the letter in an envelope and addressed it to William at Kensington Palace. She would ask Pippa to drive her to the village post office tomorrow morning to mail it. She wanted William to have time to read it and think about everything she had said before they spoke again, as she prepared for bed that night. Catherine felt a strange mixture of hope and anxiety. The letter represented a turning point, a decision, to fight for her marriage rather than simply walking away from it. But she also knew that William's response would determine whether they had a future together or whether this separation would become permanent. She had done everything she could to be honest about her feelings, her needs, and her hopes for their relationship. Now, it was up to William to decide if he was willing and able to meet her halfway. It's become the kind of partner she needed him to be. Catherine fell asleep that night, thinking about William reading her letter, hoping that he would see it not as an ultimatum, but as an invitation to rebuild their marriage on a foundation of complete honesty and true partnership. She had no idea what his response would be, but she knew that whatever happened next, she had been true to herself and to the love she still felt for the man she had married. The next morning, as she walked to the post office with Pippa, Catherine felt nervous but determined. This letter was either the beginning of their second chance or her final goodbye to the fairy tale life she had once believed was possible. Either way, she was ready to face whatever came next with honesty and courage. As she dropped the letter into the postbox, Catherine whispered a quiet prayer that love would be enough to guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The rest was up to William and to the strength of the bond they had built together over all these years of joy and struggle.